My father's memorial should have been the safest place in the world. Instead, it became the moment my entire life shattered. I was standing beside his casket, struggling to thank the guests who had come to honor him, when our pastor stepped toward me. His face looked pale, far paler than grief alone could explain. As he embraced me, he leaned so close I could feel his breath against my ear. "Don't go home," he whispered. I froze. Before I could ask why, he slipped a folded piece of paper into the pocket of my black coat. "Harbor Dock 9, midnight, come alone." Then he walked away, as though nothing had happened. My pulse thundered. Across the chapel, my husband, Ethan, stood comforting relatives. He caught my eye for only a second before looking away. Then my phone vibrated. It was him. "Beware everyone at the service. I must speak with you now. Trust no one." I stared at the message. Before I could reply, another guest approached me with condolences. By the time I looked back, Ethan was gone. That was the first mistake they made. Because from that moment forward, every lie they had carefully built began to crumble. But that's not where this story began. 3 months earlier, when people met me, they assumed I was quiet because I lacked confidence. The truth was much simpler. I listened more than I spoke. My father used to tell me, the loudest people rarely notice who's paying attention. He owned a successful maritime logistics company, though very few people knew how deeply involved I was in its operations. Officially, I was only a project coordinator. Unofficially, I had spent 10 years helping him restructure nearly every part of the business. But my father believed power attracted dangerous people, so my role stayed hidden. Only 2 people knew the full truth: my father and our attorney. Even my husband believed I worked a modest office job. When my father died suddenly from what doctors called a heart attack, everyone assumed the company would pass into the hands of his longtime business partner, Richard. Richard certainly acted like it already had. At the funeral planning meeting, he smiled politely before saying, "You've been through enough. Leave the business to people who understand it." Several executives nodded. One even laughed. I simply thanked them. Remember that detail. It matters later. The memorial drew hundreds of people: politicians, business leaders, employees, old family friends. Everyone praised my father. Yet something felt wrong. Richard wasn't grieving. He was networking, laughing, making deals, introducing himself as the future of the company. Each time someone mentioned me, he'd wave dismissively. "Poor Emily isn't built for business." Everyone believed him. Even Ethan seemed strangely distant. Whenever I approached him, someone interrupted us. My stomach tightened. Something wasn't right, but the worst part was still ahead. After the memorial ended, I ignored the pastor's warning for only 1 minute. I drove toward my house. Halfway there, every instinct screamed at me to stop, so I turned around. Instead, I parked near a cafe and waited. At exactly 11:45 p.m., I drove toward Harbor Dock 9. The harbor was deserted. Fog drifted across the water. An old fishing boat rocked gently against the pier. Standing beside it was my husband. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. "You came," he whispered. "Of course I came." He glanced behind us repeatedly. "We don't have much time. What is happening?" He handed me a small flash drive. "If anything happens to me, give this to Detective Lawson." I stared at him. "Why would something happen to you?" His voice cracked. "Because they know I've been collecting evidence." My blood ran cold. "Evidence? Against who?" He answered before I asked. "Richard." Nobody in that moment knew the full truth. Ethan confessed that 6 weeks earlier, Richard had offered him money, a fortune. All he had to do was convince me to sign several probate documents without reading them. Richard claimed they were routine inheritance paperwork. Instead, they transferred control of my father's company into shell corporations. When Ethan realized what Richard was really doing, he secretly began recording everything: every meeting, every phone call, every threat. That's why he'd been acting distant. Richard believed Ethan was helping him. Instead, my husband had become his biggest mistake. But there was something even worse. Richard hadn't acted alone. The pastor had discovered confidential financial documents hidden inside church donation files. He realized the church had unknowingly been used to launder fraudulent payments. That's why he'd warned me. This is where everything changed. The next morning, Richard arrived at company headquarters smiling. He called an emergency board meeting. I was invited only because protocol required it. As soon as everyone sat down, Richard slid several documents across the table. "Emily," he said gently, "we've prepared everything to make this transition easier." I looked down. There it was. Exactly what Ethan had described. Transfer of ownership, asset control, voting rights. Richard smiled. Just sign. Everyone watched. I picked up the pen. Richard relaxed. Several executives smiled. Then I set the pen down. I'll pass. His smile disappeared. You don't understand these documents. I understand them perfectly. His voice hardened. You have no authority here. Several people chuckled. One director actually muttered, "This will be quick." That was their final mistake. Richard slammed his hand onto the table. You have two choices. He leaned closer. Sign, or security removes you. Two guards entered. The room became silent. Richard pointed toward the door. Escort her out. Before anyone moved, the conference room doors opened. 3 detectives entered. Behind them, the company's attorney, then the lead forensic accountant, then federal investigators. Every face around the table turned white. Richard blinked. What is this? The attorney calmly placed a thick folder onto the table. No, he said. The real question is, who actually owns this company? Silence. Then he opened the folder. Inside were my father's final legal amendments. Every executive leaned forward. The attorney spoke clearly. My client, Emily Carter, has been majority owner for the past 4 years. Gasps filled the room. Someone dropped a pen. One executive whispered, "What?" Richard's face drained of color. The attorney continued. Her father transferred controlling ownership long before his death. The room exploded into whispers. Richard staggered backward. No! The attorney wasn't finished. He produced another folder. Hidden recordings, financial records, forgery evidence, bank transfers, bribery payments. Then Detective Lawson connected Ethan's flash drive to the projector. Richard's own voice echoed through the room. If Emily refuses, we'll pressure her husband. Another recording. If necessary, make her think she's alone. Another. The old man dying solved everything. Complete silence. Nobody breathed. The detective stepped forward. Richard tried to run. He didn't make it 3 steps. Handcuffs clicked around his wrists. The board members who had laughed at me only minutes earlier stared at the floor. Nobody defended him. Nobody could. The investigation lasted months. Richard was charged with fraud, conspiracy, forgery, financial crimes, and obstruction. Several executives resigned before they could be removed. Others cooperated with investigators. The church publicly cleared the pastor's name after proving he had exposed the scheme instead of participating in it. Ethan testified for the prosecution. His recordings became the cornerstone of the case. Without them, Richard might have succeeded. Months later, I officially became CEO. Not because I wanted power, because my father had trusted me long before anyone else did. I rebuilt the company, protected every employee, expanded the scholarship program my father had quietly funded for years. As for Richard, he lost everything. His wealth, his reputation, his freedom. People who once praised him refused to answer his calls. Funny how quickly arrogance disappears when the truth arrives. Sometimes I still think about that whisper inside the church. Stay away from your house. If the pastor had remained silent, if Ethan had surrendered to fear, if I had signed those papers, everything my father built would have vanished. Instead, the people who underestimated me destroyed themselves. I simply stayed calm long enough for the truth to catch up. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea who they were dealing with? Tell me your story in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more revenge stories every week.